Hey everyone, it's Steve here from the Emotion Machine, and this is episode 3 of the Emotion Machine podcast. I'm here with Brian Vondruska, who is an author and founder of the website thekindofparentyouare.com. And we're just going to talk a little bit. I'm going to get to know his perspective on things, and I'm glad to have him on, so welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Steve.
So, usually I start off with the same question with most of my guests, and my first question for you is what first got you interested in psychology and the human mind and things like that?
Well, I can point to a couple different times that were transition periods for me, or turning points. And the big one was when I was about to become a parent. I have two children, and I knew even before they were born, while I was waiting, that raising them was going to be the most important job I was ever going to do. And I already loved them beyond words, even they before they arrived. So I had to put everything I had into that. I had to let them have the opportunity to live their best possible lives. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the best possible life is and how to get it and how a parent can influence that. And turns out psychological health and fulfillment is a big part of living one's best life. And we have measures for that, and we know a good deal about how to facilitate it. So I spent a good deal of my time and energy becoming acquainted with those things.
Hmm. Was that like I know when a lot of people are expecting their first child, they end up reading a lot of books about parenting and stuff like that. Was that something that you ended up doing? Were you sort of reading books and preparing yourself for how to be the best parent?
Yeah, I was reading all kinds of books on that, and it kind of started there, but I'll explain a little bit. With those books, what I found was, depending on the book you pick up, there's different advice. You might find actually opposite advice on the same topic, depending on which book you pick up. So I had to go deeper and ask why. Well, why is doing that thing, following that particular practice, the best thing to do for my child's development? And as you get deeper, you can ask why after you get the answer to that why, and you can keep going. You ultimately get down to psychological fulfillment and what it means to live a full life. So I kind of started off, as you say, looking through the parenting books, and then had to dive deeper and look into psychology and philosophy and other things as well, even economics.
Hmm. Yeah. Would you say that a lot of parenting books don't really have a firm grasp of psychology, or that it's a lot of folk theory and sort of quote unquote common sense type theory, or is that one of your impressions?
I think you get a mix, but it's a relatively small slice that has folk theories and kind of homespun ideas. I think parents today are a little more discriminating, and it's harder to pass that off as something of value. We generally recognize which things are on a relatively firmer foundation, and today you see a lot of things that are based in positive psychology and based in emotional intelligence. So I think the narrative has definitely been elevated recently. Maybe 20 years ago it wasn't like that, but these days I think there's a firmer foundation. It's more grounded in research. Nonetheless, you still see advice that spans the spectrum and doesn't always agree.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What would be something that you've discovered with your research in psychology that you think is really applicable to parenting and something that every parent should know about?
Well, I think for me, if I can go very general, the biggest thing, because it can apply pretty much anywhere, is that environments. Um, social environments have a profound effect on healthy psychological development. A good environment will enable psychological health and fulfillment and well-being, while a poor environment brings psychological maladies and frustration and ill-being. And where that applies to parenting is, if you're a parent, you're an environment. You're a major portion of your child's environment. And that means you have a great deal of power to impact your child's healthy development. And along with that, a great deal of responsibility to do so effectively.
Hmm. What are some things that you would think would define a healthy environment?
Well, we have a pretty good idea for what that is. And if I can, uh, I'll go into self-determination theory, which has different dimensions for an environment that a parent can provide that leads to a healthy development of a child. The first one is involvement, and that basically means being a vital and benevolent figure in the child's life. The second one is structure, which means communicating boundaries and so forth, including rules and expectations. And then the third one is autonomy support, which entails empowering the child to make choices and basically be him or herself.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, I guess, it's always a difficult balance for parents. How much do you set boundaries? How much do you allow for autonomy? Um, is the balance going to be different depending on the child, or yeah, would you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's different, and everybody's situation is different. So you have different personalities and different circumstances, different family dynamics, and that's part of the reason why you have such a diverse landscape of parenting literature and advice, because nobody has the whole picture. And the answer is, you're not going to get the answer from anywhere as far as how to raise your child. It's something you have to invest the time in to figure out what's the best balance of those things, what's the best mix of techniques that works for your family between you and your child.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sure it takes a lot of trial and error, and um, I've seen you mention this in some of your videos, how like, the parent often needs to grow and evolve with the child. And you both learn from each other in many ways and grow together. And there's like that feedback loop between parent and child.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as you have things figured out and you get that right balance, things change, and it's always that way. Your child is growing, and interests are changing, and different friends and relationships are coming and going. And at the same time, you're building your own capabilities. You're learning about yourself, and that's changing too. And you keep finding new ways you need to grow. There's always new points of frustration and miscommunication and disagreements that uncovers maybe some of your own imperfections. I thought I learned how to be patient, but now I'm getting my buttons pushed again. Why is that? There's always more room to grow, and so the key is, you never get there. You're not attaining some level of ideal or perfection, but you're growing towards it. So the key is, you're better than you were, and that applies to both parent and child as they both change, and that dynamic evolves.
Hmm. Yeah, let me ask you, what is one or two ways that you've grown since you've had kids?
Well, certainly I've become more patient. That's something that I've spent a good deal of time working on. And I've become more generous with my time. Um, Time is a very scarce commodity, and I think it's always going to be a limited quantity that you're going to have a hard time figuring out how best to allocate. And I find that that's really the fulcrum upon which most of my other imperfections and areas for self-development really rest. If I can be generous with my time, with my children, and invest the effort and attention, most everything else just falls into place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would you say is the number one biggest problem of how people approach parenting these days?
Well, I think you can tell the problems by what we're trying to fix. And if you look at the discussions that are out there now and the books that are available, can I give you two? Because I think they're related.
Yeah, of course.
There's one for the children and one for the parents. For the child, I think there's a lot about avoiding selfishness. There's a lot of articles and books and everything about avoiding being selfish, meaning there's big egos. There's kids looking for attention and validation from social media and so forth. And for the parents, there's a lot being written about being overprotective, not allowing children the opportunities to make mistakes and to learn from them. So these are the helicopter parents who swoop in and fix problems for their children, or the lawnmower parents, which is a newer term being used, meaning they clear the way and prevent the problems from arising in the first place. So I said they're connected, and I'm going to speculate a little bit about where these two trends came from. But if you remember, about 5 to 10 years ago, attachment parenting was very trendy. You don't hear as much about it now, but then it was all over the place. And anytime something becomes trendy, you're going to have people overdoing it. Mm-hmm. So these problems, the selfish kids and the overprotective parents, I think are the result of taking a good idea and then just going too far. The attachment techniques are built on the concept that children need a strong relationship with their parents as a secure base. And I think we lost sight of that somewhere along the way, and parents mistook the idea of a strong relationship with giving the child whatever he or she wants. And that led to a selfish child. Also, a lot of parents lost sight of the idea that a parent-child relationship is meant to be a secure base, a base from which the child can then go and do other things, which they can't do if the parent is doing it for them and hovering and being overprotective.
Mm. Is helicopter parenting and lawnmower parenting, are they both too protective?
Yes, the helicopter parent is maybe a little less proactive than the lawnmower parent. The lawnmower parent would anticipate problems and just clear them out of the way before they even happen.
But that's not always a good thing?
No. Problems are learning. You need to be able to encounter difficulties, make mistakes, and then learn from the mistakes. And it's that secure base that a child is supposed to go back to and get some instruction to help learn from those mistakes. Get some information, some real-time feedback, understand how these consequences came about. And they feel more confident doing that when they have that secure base. The secure base is not there to handle all those things for the child. Those things are growing up. That's what the child's supposed to be doing. It's painful, but when you overcome those difficulties, it's very enriching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that, having parenting as a secure base is definitely, much needed, and, children go out in the real world, go to school, participate in activities, and either succeed or fail at certain projects or activities. And then it's good that they have a parent to come back to that's still supportive and gives them that comfort when dealing with that pain in the real world. Do you think there's also a job of parents to nudge children or to expose them to obstacles purposely?
No, I don't. I think obstacles are plentiful, and we're not going to run out of them. You are going to have to deal with that, whether you're a child or a parent or whomever, naturally. It's not one of those things that you need to artificially manufacture. Life presents those on its own, and plenty of them.
That's a good point. Yeah. In contrast to helicopter parenting, there's also I'm not sure how much this is trendy anymore, but I know tiger mom parenting was a big thing for a little while, and it's sort of I guess the opposite of helicopter parenting. I was curious of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would be the opposite, but it is it's not a very supportive style of parenting. The way I view the tiger parenting style is very heavy in parental control, and we know that parental control is not very healthy for a child. It doesn't enable optimal development. There's a lot of different kinds of parental control, but from what I understand, tiger parenting is heavy in, it could be physical punishment, but it could be other things like criticism and sarcasm and mockery and inducing shame and guilt. And all of these things might get the right behaviors that you're looking for, but it also does a lot of harm and does psychological harm. It modifies not only the behavior but the thoughts as well, and that's beyond the purview of parenting anyway. But the fact that it's harmful, and we know that, it is a pretty clear indicator that that's not something that we should be doing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I have a feeling I already know your answer to this question, but I figured it's probably worth bringing up anyway. Um, Physical punishment, spanking, it seems to me that a lot of the research shows that that's very harmful forms of punishment and discipline. I was curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Any kind of physical punishment has some pretty clear correlations between that parenting technique and poor outcomes, whether it's low self-esteem, poor behaviors, poor performance in school or social relationships. So you would think that there wouldn't be any debate around that issue, but it turns out there still is. There are still people who are looking at the data and saying it doesn't differentiate between abuse and a loving spank. To me, I think that's a bit stretching it. The data and the research is pretty clear, but it's hard to convince everybody, and there's still some discussion going on about whether that's the case all the time or not.
Hmm. Yeah, I imagine that a lot of people that still practice spanking, it's usually something that their parents did to them, and there's sort of a cycle of behavior from generation to generation that keeps that going to some degree. Um, as far as punishment in general, I know some parents can be scared of ever enforcing some form of punishment, and I'm sure that leads to certain types of entitlement or bad behavior. What is your take on what are good types of punishment?
I'm not sure there are any good types of punishment. I don't punish. I believe in natural consequences. If a child does something maladaptive, there's usually not much that I need to do to compound those consequences. What I believe I need to do is provide information as far as what what behavior, what alternate behaviors there are, why this behavior led to this kind of consequence, and then support the child through either undoing what they did or coming up with a better way next time, and continue to provide feedback in real time while the child continues along, either fixing it or coming up against the same situation again. So there's a lot that can be done that's not punishment. You know, all those things I just talked about tell you that if you're not punishing, that doesn't mean you're doing nothing. There's still a lot of involvement that you can offer, and a lot of guidance and coaching that aren't punishment.
True. Yeah, I mean, you can adequately shape or guide a child's behavior maybe just strictly through, reinforcement or feedback and coaching, like you said. So that's
It
interesting.
it kind of goes back to the relationship too. They're related. When you're punishing, you're positioning yourself as an adversary, and the child, I think, is less likely to accept and internalize whatever behaviors you're trying to have them adopt long term. But if you're positioning yourself as an ally and walking through those problems with the child, they are more receptive to the coaching, more likely to assimilate the information, internalize the behaviors, and adopt those same behaviors, assuming you're also modeling them. Because if you're taking the time to sit down and explain it, you're probably walking the talk as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, I wanted to get your take on the influence of TV and I guess more broadly, using tablets or iPhones and technology. I don't know how old your kids are, but do you do you feel like it's a parent's job to limit TV time, or do you think TV is ultimately a corrosive force, or what's your take on that?
I do think we should put some limitations on that. Um, it wouldn't be good for, I believe, a child to have free reign over whatever they want to do. They're not, whether it's screens or something else. I don't think they're supposed to have that. We're supposed to set some expectations and some boundaries. Screens are tricky because they're everywhere. So you're not going to avoid screens. You want to have a healthy level of it. I look at it kind of like junk food. You're not going to avoid junk food and candy, and it's no good to keep your child away from junk food and candy. It's part of the world. It's out there. So they need to be able to enjoy it because it's fun, but also know how to not overdo it, and find other things to do if we're talking about screens, or eat if we're talking about junk food, and be able to control their impulses when they feel like they want to keep going, but they've already done enough.
Yeah.
It, and there's more than one kind of screen time. There's active screen time and there's passive screen time. If you're watching TV, that's pretty passive. You're sitting there doing nothing. But my kids are 9 and 6, and so I see them doing active things as well. Beyond playing games, they might be making music, making a video for YouTube, and editing that video using software. And those things can be creative, and they can learn from those. It's not the same as sitting on the couch watching a television show doing nothing.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction, I think. Um, this is um, this is another sort of a switch in topic, but would you say parenting is for everyone, or should some people not have kids?
Well, that's a very personal decision, and I wouldn't presume to make it for anybody whether to have children or not. A couple would have to consider their plans for the future, their motivations, their personal inclinations, their capacities to care for a child. And no one else has access to someone else's situation to be able to make that decision, and certainly shouldn't have the control to make it on their behalf. So I think it's a personal decision. But that said, there would certainly be wrong reasons to have kids. If you think it's going to fix your relationship, or if you think there's a tax break in it for you, or you're pressured into it by family members, um, maybe you've already decided your child's future and you want to have that star football player in your family. There's lots of wrong reasons to start a family, but I don't think there should be any any legal conditions around that, or any opportunity for somebody else to make that decision for a couple.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Although I'm sure you run into parents at school or in public, and I'm sure you sometimes think to yourself like these people aren't currently fit to be parents. Based on the way that they're treating their child. Um, what are your thoughts on that? I'm sure you run into situations like that, right?
Yeah, we see all kinds of situations, and I think it's important to try not to judge too harshly, because sometimes you see things that are really beyond the pale, but other times you see things that you have to realize are just a snapshot of somebody's life. And you don't know what factors led up to that moment, that snapshot that you saw, what interpersonal dynamics there were leading up to it, what the circumstances are. And we've all been there. I mean, parenting is extremely hard. It pulls you in so many different directions at once. You're going to find yourself at the edge, and sometimes you're going to do the wrong thing no matter who you are. Nobody gets it right all the time. So realizing that, I try not to judge people too harshly, because I mean, sometimes I might be that guy. Uh,
Hmm.
like I said, nobody gets it right all the time. I think we all make mistakes, and you just you have to you have to do your best and try to do it better than you did yesterday. But I try to give people the benefit of the doubt when I can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are all really good points. How much does your parenting style get influenced by your own parents, or I guess personally and also generally?
Are you asking mine in particular?
Both, I guess, your particular how much of your own parents do you see in yourself as far as parenting, and also, I guess, generally.
I think generally there is some pass down of style, although I don't have access to any numbers on that, so I can't tell you how strong that correlation is. But from my own experience, I think my parents were very autonomy supportive, and I find that being the parenting dimension that I identify the most strongly with. I'm the same way, so I would definitely attribute that to the style with which I was raised.
Mm. So, um, your parents gave you a lot of choice.
I did. I had a lot of choice, a lot of room to do my own thing, and sometimes that meant not doing the right thing. But like we talked about, I think that's important. Learning how to make decisions involves making a lot of bad decisions.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, a lot of people talk about how, you know, the new generation is always entitled and narcissistic. How much of that do you think is true or overblown?
I do think a lot of it is overblown. I can see it. I'm not saying it's not there because I can see it, but I don't think it's as big a problem as it might be made out to be. If you look at any individual kid, um, I don't always see it as a big problem. I think when you look across many children, you can pick out, again, little snapshots of their day and interactions that you've had, and you can piece together that pattern to say, gee, there's a lot of selfish activity here. But if you look at any one child and spend some time as they go about their day, I don't see a selfish undertone that really drives most of these children. So yeah, it's there, but I don't think it's as pervasive and as big a problem as it's being made out to be. People are in general pretty good, and yeah, there's trends that go this direction or that, but I think my prediction is a lot of these kids, as they get into the world, are going to grow out of those little selfish habits, and by the time they get to their 20s and 30s, I'm not sure you're going to see it anymore.
Hmm. So it could be more of a developmental phase where younger kids are going to be more selfish. Maybe they haven't fully developed social skills yet, or empathy. And would you see it as sort of a developmental phase like that?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Do you mean there's an empathy deficit among children in general,
Yeah.
or do yeah, I think it's more like, again, you see snapshots of that. You see people taking selfies. You see them posting their self-centered videos online, and those are very visible. But a lot of the things they do throughout the day aren't as visible, and maybe that selfish thing you see is not a true representation of who that child is. That's where I'm coming from. I'm not sure it's really a representative cross section to look at all these different signals of selfishness and to say we have a generation that has an empathy deficit might be a bit of a stretch.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, your website, thekindofparentyouare.com, tell me a little more about it. When did you start it? What was the main goal behind it?
Well, the website is fairly new. It came out a few months ago, and I wanted to present the subject of parenting through the self-development perspective. So it's really about creating the kind of parent you are and doing so intentionally. For example, right now I'm doing a series of articles, and it's September 2017, a series of articles and videos about parental behaviors. For example, if you want to cultivate honesty with your child, there's lots of ways to do that. But the way I'm going to focus on and talk about is to actually be honest. And there's lots of ways to be honest in interactions with your family on a day-to-day basis. And that modeling of behaviors goes a long way towards your child's adoption of those behaviors. So in addition to behaviors, I'll talk about parenting styles, defining your core beliefs, learning about mistakes, all these things that are self-improvement centered. So I think it's a different perspective on the subject of parenting, and an underemphasized one.
Mm.
The parenting landscape is very crowded, the literature landscape, I mean, but it's very child-centric. And I think a lot of parents, new and expectant parents especially, sense this and would have a natural inclination to drive their own development. But there's not enough people talking about it. So there is probably not even enough awareness that that's that's an avenue that they can take. And it's really necessary. There's challenges with raising children that are different than the kinds of challenges you faced before you had children, and it needs a different kind of self to meet them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I like how the shift in focus between child, what should I do for my child, to focusing on, how do I develop as a good parent, and how do I, looking inward as a parent and trying to be, the best person you can be in that regard. I think it is a very important shift in focus.
I think it can be very enriching as well. Self-development's important, but it's a little more. It takes on more of a transcendent quality when you focus your efforts not on your own well-being, but on that of somebody else.
Hmm.
So it takes yourself out of the focus of self-development, and I think that lets you develop yourself more as an outcome of what you're doing rather than a focus. And I think that's important because ultimately you want to be able to. I think most people want to be able to make a difference in the world, and you do that through other people. So focusing on someone else, like a child, your child, is one way to do that and make yourself a better person while making somebody else the best person they can be as well.
Gotcha, gotcha. Um, so this is something that's always interested me. I'm not a parent currently, but well, I don't have kids yet, but I've always been interested in the subject of homeschooling, and I was just curious of your thoughts on that. I guess that's sort of a very broad question, but
It is, but I'm intrigued by the subject of homeschooling as well. And it wasn't really an option for me to do, but I do find there's potential benefits to doing that.
mhm.
There's a lot of structure in school, obviously.
Yeah, I think part of my interest is always I never really liked school, like not in the sense where I have to do work, but I just the structure of it, the environment of it. I think a lot of parents sometimes they see school as kind of like a like babysitting in a way. It's somewhere to send off your kids and go to work. But I think parents sometimes underestimate or they don't realize how important it is for them to be active participants in their child's education. So even if you're not homeschooling, it's so crucial to be actively engaged in your child's education.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the benefit of homeschooling is that you get to follow your child's curiosity and let them manipulate the world at their own pace and follow their interests. And ultimately, you can get to all the subject matter that you would get in a structured school. But in a structured school, you have to follow a curriculum. You can't slow down to allow each child to follow their own interests. So I think that is a an advantage for homeschooling. Disadvantage might be you don't get the social environment that you get in a school. So net, I don't know whether it's a positive or a negative, but I like the idea of it. I just never had a chance to do it myself.
Yeah, yeah, that's a common worry for homeschoolers is not getting that social integration, and you have to also I guess be active with making sure your child is doing activities outside of the home. You can join a sports league or join a club, so at least they're getting that social interaction. So I think homeschooling, anyone that chooses to homeschool should be aware of ways to keep your child socially integrated.
Yeah, I think they're coming up with better ways to do that. There are networks of homeschoolers where they have different teams and different group activities and things. So they're aware that they need to have that social aspect, and they're doing more of it than maybe the initial homeschoolers did, but it's probably still not to the level of a formal school.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm sure it's a little bit easier to network now and have communities of parents that are homeschooling. So I guess that is a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah,
So you have an upcoming book, The Optimal Life Experience. Is this your first book?
this is my first book.
Okay. And I saw how this was initially going to be the first chapter of another book called The Kind of Parent You Are.
Right, The Kind of Parent You Are is coming out in February of 2018. And back to the first part of the interview, we were talking about how I was reading other parenting resources and kept asking why. Why do I want to do this? Why is this the right thing to do? And why is that the right reason? Um, that was the first chapter of The Kind of Parent You Are. It was supposed to set the foundation and say, here's the reason why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing them. It's because I want to facilitate my children's development towards the best possible life, and here's the path to take to get it. Asking all those whys turned out to be much more than a chapter. It turned out to be a whole book's worth of material. So the Optimal Life Experience is really a full book of deriving those answers, asking the questions and deducing the answers. The Kind of Parent You Are will have a synopsis of the optimal life experience. So you wouldn't, if you're a parent and you want to get the version of how do parents facilitate that, you wouldn't need to read two books. It's all summarized in the early parts of The Kind of Parent You Are. But if you're interested in the theory and how do you get there, what's the line of logic that takes me to the answers, that's the optimal life experience.
Yeah, I got to read a little bit of it this morning, and I'm definitely going to finish it. But yeah, it's very thorough theoretical framework for your approach really to life in general. And how much of, and you mentioned self-determination theory earlier. How much of the theory of the optimal life experience is based on self-determination theory?
Quite a lot. There's early in the book. If you're saying you had a chance to look through some of it, you've probably gotten to some self-determination theory parts already, because I used some of that very early in the book. And then, as you know, the book is kind of a stepwise progression towards the answer. So it's way at the bottom of the foundation. That self-determination theory really covers a lot of psychological ground. It's well grounded in research. There's thousands of papers that are undergirding its different mini theories, and it's embedded in other sciences like sociology and philosophy and so forth. So it's the ideal foundation upon which to ask these questions and develop the answers, partly because the self-determination theory researchers were asking the same questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you mind trying to give a sort of quick rundown of what self-determination theory is, especially the two components of it, relatedness and competence?
Self-determination theory says that we all have basic needs, basic psychological needs. And these are relatedness, which means connecting with other people; competence, which means having an impact on the world, having capacities, effectiveness, and skill growth; and autonomy, meaning being able to author your own actions. So relatedness, competence, and autonomy are the three basic and universal human needs. They apply to everybody. And there are environments that support the fulfillment of those needs and environments that thwart the fulfillment of those needs. When you have the supportive environment, you fulfill those needs and you have greater well-being because of it.
Hmm.
There's much more to it, but that's kind of the elevator version.
Yeah, yeah. How new is self-determination theory? How long has it been around for?
I'd say 30 some years.
Okay. If there was one book for someone to learn just about self-determination theory, what would you recommend?
Oh, there's a book that came out this year by the co-developers of self-determination theory, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. It's called Self-Determination Theory: Basic Psychological Needs in Motivation, Development, and Wellness. I just pulled it aside so I could read the subtitle because I have it nearby. It came out this year. It's 2017, and it is extremely comprehensive and just covers not only self-determination theory, but everything upon which it's based and different competing theories and so forth. It's an excellent piece of work. So I would recommend that to anybody who's interested in self-determination theory.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to add that to my list. Um, I guess we're approaching the end here. Is there anything that you want to touch on, or any main message you'd really like to leave for parents?
Well, I think the key thing is if you're a parent, realize that you're probably having a hard time because this is a new kind of challenge, as we talked about, and it's normal. Everybody's having a hard time. So I would say once you have that perspective that this is normal and everybody else is going through it, it kind of helps you relax a little bit and realize that it's okay. I'm going to find a way to get through this day by day. And really, if you look at it as a self-development journey, maybe I made some mistakes today, took a couple steps back, but tomorrow I can find ways to do it better. Eventually, you're going to keep growing, and you're gonna find yourself the better for it. So that's how I look at it, and I'm not sure other people see it that way because the self-development aspect really isn't emphasized, and I think people don't realize that that's a key part of the whole parenting experience is being challenged, sometimes failing, and picking yourself up and learning from it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really, really healthy perspective. And when I eventually have kids, I hope that I can, understand that in myself, and that it's going to be a growth process for me. I'm going to make mistakes, going to have to be patient with myself and my kids. And I think it's just a really good philosophy and perspective. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. And where are the best places for people to find your work and follow you?
thekindofparentyouare.com is where I have my articles, and I have some links to the books. I have an author page on Amazon, so you can search me there, and you can find me on Twitter at Brian Vondruska.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I highly recommend people check that out. I'm definitely going to be finishing the new book too, which is coming out in a couple weeks, September 2017, The Optimal Life Experience. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Steve, and I've checked out a lot of your stuff as well, and I can tell when the day comes and you're a parent, you're going to do just fine. You've really taken an understanding of all the psychological inputs, and I know you're going to put those to good use one of these days. And again, I appreciate you having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. I hope so. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That was episode 3 of the Emotion Machine podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you'd like to check out more content about psychology and self-improvement, please check out my website at theemotionmachine.com. And if you're feeling really generous and you enjoy these episodes and you enjoy my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And you can find me there at www.theemotionmachine.com/Patreon. That is www.theemotionmachine.com/Patreon. Any support from you guys is greatly appreciated, and it keeps me going and it keeps me motivated to create new content and keep improving the emotion machine. So that would be greatly appreciated. And thanks for listening. Stay tuned for next episode.